Hey, friend, have you purchased your ticket for Little by Little Homeschool Conference yet? I hope that you have, but if you have not, tickets will be on sale for only a few more weeks, or unless they sell out before that. There is a limit to the amount of tickets because there's a limit to the venue that we're at. Now, I do want to give you a heads up. If you've been thinking about getting a ticket, I want to let you know that the conference is going to be aired on our local Christian radio station very soon. And I cannot promise what will happen once they start sharing that and promoting it on air. So tickets might sell out much faster. So if you've been thinking about it, definitely go check it out at littlebylittlehomeschool.com/conference, or is it forward slash? I don't know, slash, the one that you use when you're typing out a website. But the link is always going to be in the show notes for you. Let's turn our attention now to today's episode.
Welcome to Little by Little Homeschool Podcast, where you'll learn tips and strategies that will empower you to home educate your children. I'm Leigh, a homeschool mom of over 12 years, which includes 2 graduates. When I started homeschooling, I was pretty much on my own and was desperate for encouragement and help. My mission is to be a source of encouragement and help to you. Whether you are just beginning your homeschool journey or you're deep into the homeschool lifestyle, Little by Little Homeschool wants to help you stay the course because all the time you are investing into your children is completely worth it. If you're ready to take your homeschool to new levels, keep listening.
If you have 2 or more children, you're going to run into this dilemma of educating multiple ages at the same time. It doesn't matter if there is just a year difference between them, or there's a couple years, or you have way more than 2, you're going to run into it. How can you juggle multiple ages? Now, I'm going to try to say in this episode ages and not grades. Grade is just a word that's just still so ingrained in my mind. If you did not listen to episode 294, where I talked all about grades, you're going to want to go ahead and listen to that one after this one. Because age really describes things better when we are homeschooling. We are not beholden to having a certain grade. You are teaching a certain age, you are teaching a certain child at a certain age, because we know that even with ages, an 8-year-old son of yours can be different than an 8-year-old daughter of yours, but even an 8-year-old son can be different than his brother when he was 8. So how do you stay sane? How do you keep from going crazy with homeschooling multiple ages? I have a couple of tips for you. I actually have 3 major tips and then a bonus. So make sure you stick around for the bonus. Let me give you a little bit of a backstory. When I first started homeschooling, I had a 3rd grader and a 1st grader. You've probably heard that multiple times, and a preschooler that went to preschool. And I started out with every subject for each of the grades. So for 2 kids, preschooler, I didn't worry anything about with him. So I had every subject for 3rd grade, every subject for 1st grade. That, year 1, there was a lot to get used to. So I didn't even know that what I was piling on was a little bit too much. I didn't really know that I was going crazy because I was pretty much running on adrenaline and excitement over homeschooling. Year 2, I had all 3 kids, a preschooler, a 2nd grader, and a 4th grader. And I was semi insane that year. I piled a lot onto my plate when it came to homeschool. Year 3, I began to develop systems and was able to then see the fruit of those systems. I felt comfortable and confident to make changes, knowing that I wasn't ruining myself, my children, or our homeschool or our family. Then from year 4 on, and we are in our 14th year right now, I pretty much have it down to a science. However, every single year was slightly different. But I had encountered enough during those first couple of years that I knew, oh, this scenario is kind of like 2 years ago when we ran into this. And I had enough of a basis, a foundation in wisdom with homeschooling that I knew how to adjust every year. So pretty much every year there is still this framework that I have and this ability to jump around to different kids. These past 2, so last year and this year, is the first year that I have had one child. And even when I went down to two, it was a big difference. So when you are in the height of homeschooling and you have multiple children, know that at some point they're going to graduate and you're going to start to reduce. So a lot of times people start off with homeschooling, they might have one or they might have a couple if you pull them from private or public school. And then you're going to reach what I call the heyday when you have all of your children and you are managing the education for all of them. And that will last for a couple years, possibly or longer, depending upon the age range. There's a lot of different variables for that. But then you'll start to notice it starts to go back down. So I kind of see like it reaching a crescendo peak point, and it might stay at that crescendo for a little bit and then it'll start to come back down. And so I'm at this point where it is one 16-year-old who is in, we'll say 11th grade, because that's how people try to classify it. But it's so easy. It's much easier. So if you are in the thick of it, it's okay. You will get to that other side. So let's jump into those 3 tips and then the bonus I have for you. The very first tip is something that I have already alluded to, and that is that you do not need every grade for every subject. Stop buying too much curriculum and too many resources. So that means when I started off, we'll give myself as an example, first grader and a third grader. I had first grade science, I had third grade science, I had first grade history, I had third grade history, I had first grade geography, I had third grade geography. Let's go on and on and on. Art, music, all kinds of stuff. When it comes to homeschooling, you don't have to do that. Now, there's going to be some nuances and some caveats, and we're going to get to those. Focus on having the math and the language arts at an individual level, unless you have kids who are maybe on the same level. I mean, you might have twins, or you might have kids that are just a year apart and they are in the same level when it comes to math, or they're on the same level when it comes to something in language arts, writing or spelling. If you run into this and you are having concerns and kids are upset about the grade that's written on the book, you're going to want to go back and listen to 294 that I mentioned earlier. It'll be listed down below and you can listen to, actually, no, not 294, the grade. Yes, maybe that's the one. If there's a different episode, I'll list it. I always listen to the episode show notes, just more that goes along with that topic. So if you're like, I need some more meat on the bones for this, then go ahead and listen to those. Okay. So you have your math and your language arts. So what is language arts? Actually, my husband recently, we were talking and saying something, and he's like, "What is language arts?" And it took me a little while to kind of figure it out too, because I don't have training in any type of formal education or school teaching or anything like that. So language arts is going to be their reading. It's going to be their spelling that eventually you can include the handwriting, the writing. And so at different ages, it's going to be something a little bit different. Whereas in the beginning, you're really just working on the reading or the letter recognition, the sound, the phonics, all of that stuff, and you're going to build up. So you don't have a kindergartner writing a story. You maybe have a kindergartner that's learning the shape of how to write their letters. And so it grows. And then one of the big changes comes from spelling to vocabulary when kids are probably usually about middle school. So for middle school and high school, it's more vocabulary if you want to do that. So, I mean, again, what you include in language arts is going to be your choice. And, you're the one who has to then submit things and things into the school district and prepare your child for whatever is in their future. Okay. So math and language arts is done individually. Episode 284 is going to dive a bit more into this when it comes to subject and content skills. Yeah. So go ahead and listen to that one too. But when it comes to, content subjects, when it comes to content subjects, so the skills are going to be the math and the language arts. The content subjects, you're like, what? Again, episode 284 are going to be things like your history, your science, geography, music. And if the kids are close in age, or they are close-ish or close enough that there isn't some big, huge difference in their ages, do those subjects together. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in one of the other tips. But if you have a big difference in age, if you have a third grader and a 10th grader, you're probably not going to do science together. You could maybe recruit the 10th grader to help you along with their younger sibling with the science and teaching them what they know and talking about it. But you're not going to have the third grader doing the 10th grade science. So if there's that big of an age gap there, this is where the nuances come into play. And the fact that your high schooler is probably going to be doing a lot of those subjects on their own. You might be leading and guiding them, facilitating some of them, so it doesn't come into play there. But when your kids are close in age, then you can do that. Now, I suggest if you say have a first grader, again, I don't want to use try not to use grades, but it just kind of classifies. So say you have a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 10-year-old, and you're like, "Well, what do I do for science?" I don't think there's anything wrong with doing a science that would maybe be geared a bit more towards the 10-year-old or the 8-year-old. Let the 5, 6-year-old, let them listen in on what they want to. They'll pick up what is gonna be new to them, and they're not gonna be able to pick up on everything, and that's okay. They'll pick up on some things, and then they'll kinda roll out of the room, they'll go play, they'll go whatever, but they've heard a little bit of something, and you'll be so surprised when they kinda pull out these tidbits of information. When it comes to, say, let's do science or history. I remember doing this with my kids. There was different ages that they were, and the youngest, I just wanted them to listen to the history lesson and listen to the book as I read it. The next one, I would maybe ask some questions, we'll do a little bit of narration, and the oldest one, we would dive in a little bit more. Maybe there would be a video I would show or something, some type of audiobook to listen to, or maybe I would require them to write a couple of sentences. So you see how that can kind of work. Tip number 2 is to be selective about the subjects or topics, resources, curriculum, whatever it is that you're using. Be selective about what you're going to use. Do not pick multiple sciences to do in one year. Just choose the one. And if you get through that science resource, you can move on. If your kids are really enjoying science, you can then go on and move on to a different resource. But be selective in what you're going to do. When you have so many resources sitting there on your bookshelf looking at you, and you're looking at it, and you're saying, I feel guilty for not doing all those. You want to know what my number one tip is for that? Choose what you're going to do this year. Now, I love a good full bookshelf. I think it looks fantastic. But if that's stressing you out, take all of the resources, all the curriculum that you are not going to use this year, or if you get to it, it'd be a bonus. Put them in a box, put them in one of those big tubs, shove it in a closet, put it in your attic, put it in your basement, put it up in your garage, wherever you store things, label it so you know it's there and you know what it is, and then just do what you have pulled out. You're going to feel a huge sense of relief. And if what you have pulled out doesn't work, you know that you have some backups. Backup, I should say, not multiple backups. You have one backup. Choose the next thing. Or if you get through that resource, say that science book, and your kids are loving it, then go ahead, pull out that box, that tub, and choose one to move on to next for this homeschool year. When it comes to the beginning of the homeschool year, I highly recommend starting off. Now, I know you might be a couple weeks, you might be a couple months into it, but when you start off, it's so good just to focus on the math and language arts, just those core subjects right there, and then adding in subjects one at a time. You might be right now, we are here in the beginning of October, and you're feeling overwhelmed already. Scale back. It is okay to pull some of those out. Maybe you need to do a restart. Maybe you need to say, okay, we are doing way too much. We're going to scale back on everything, and we're just going to get really good at doing our math and language arts and maybe a read aloud. And then add in history. See how that goes for at least a week, if not 2 or more. And once you get into the groove of that, you can add in science. If that gets to be overwhelming, pull back again. It's okay. And it's okay for your kids also to work on some of those subjects alone. If they have, say, say they're doing a math program that is online or a video that they watch, it's okay for them to do that alone. Don't feel guilty about them doing subjects on their own. This is them taking the reins of their education and them seeing that they don't have to just learn from mom or mom just doing the lesson, that there are multiple ways, and it helps them to know how do they learn best. You might find, and they might find, that watching a video when it comes to a math lesson, that just doesn't cut it for them. They need the person to be there. They need to be able to put their hand on your arm as you're teaching them. And so it really helps them to learn how they learn best. Number 3. Actually, I'm sorry. I have 4 tips. I misnumbered. I wrote down 1, 2, 3, and 3. So I have 4 tips. Individual subjects, when it comes to individual subjects with their lessons, the biggest tip in homeschooling multiple ages is that you're going to be bouncing back and forth. Let me give you an example of this, and there's a lot of different ways that this can go, but I want to get your mind going. I want to get your creativity and your problem-solving skills going. Let's do an example of math. I would have my kids when we started off with morning time, then we would go into subjects. And for quite a few years, I required them to do math first. Why? Because math brought frustration and maybe some tears. And when they were fresh, they actually accomplished it well. They learned a lot more. And as they got older, they started to recognize that. So when I opened it up to say, you can start with whatever subjects you want to start with, they would then in high school prefer to start with math. They would say, I just want to get it done. You might have kids that love math and they'd be like, "Ooh, I wanna that's like the dessert for me. I'm gonna wait and do that at the end." That's okay too. So let's give an example of you have a couple of children that are in the elementary age range, and you have math. You might find that you have to put kids in different rooms. You might have a main room where a lot of your homeschool material is. Maybe it's a homeschool room or a dining room or a living room. And wherever the hub of where you're going to be, you're gonna wanna put the children who need more oversight. You know what I'm talking about. The ones that are gonna fool around, the ones that are going to sneak out of the room, you're gonna wanna put them close to you within eye distance that you can see them, other children that you feel are more responsible, and I found it as for my kids, it was a way for them they wanted to be able to do a subject in a different room. They wanted to be able to go to the room, but they had to show that they were trustworthy, and so there would be a time of learning that they were trustworthy, and then once they are trustworthy, there still is some checking in on them to make sure that they're okay. But let's say you have a couple of children. Let's just say they're okay to be in the same room as each other. They could be all sitting at the dining room table. Say you have 3 children and you're doing math. You could have 1 or 2 of them. So say we have 3. You're gonna have 2 of them possibly start their lesson, but they're gonna start with the review. In some of the math curriculum that's maybe in just a textbook or a workbook, there's gonna be sections of review. You just have them start with the review. You might pick just a couple of problems for them to do, or you might just say, "Let's just start and see how far you get." And then the third child is going to actually get the lesson from you. Now, this is if you are doing individual lessons with them, if you have a curriculum that you are doing lessons and sitting down with them. So 2 are doing review, 1 is getting a lesson. Once that 1 gets the lesson, they start working on their new problems and then move into the review. You then move on to child number 2, and whatever order this is, you might have kids who might be like, "Oh, I always wanna be last," and they might pick the order, and they're totally okay with that. Or you might have to choose who gets to go first. Well, yesterday you got to or this week, it's probably easier to do it like this. This week, child, A gets to go first the entire week, and then next week, child B. So you have to kinda decide how that's gonna go. But then you move on to the 2nd child, and you do their lesson, and then when they're done, they move from the review to moving into the section of doing any new material. And then child number 3, you're gonna do their lesson. And so they would have been working on review. In the meantime, you're gonna do their lesson. Now, you might be doing a math program that has a lesson, or it might be completely online. If you have multiple computers or laptops, they can do it at the same time. You might have 1, and so in some programs, they watch a video and then they do the book work. So instead of you doing the lesson, you're gonna end up doing the same thing, but bouncing the laptop around for them to do their different lessons. Do you see how there's just multiple different ways that you can do this and just choose one way? Don't try to think about it and overthink it. Just try one way and see what works and then adjust as you need to. So, this rotating around is something that you can do for any of the individual subjects. I'm just using math because that typically is something that is done individually, even if you have children that are just maybe 10 months apart. Oftentimes, they might be at different levels because maybe they started their formal education one started it 10 months earlier than the other one did. All right, tip number 3, or sorry, 4, remember I misnumbered this, is that morning time is your best friend. Morning time is just a phrase that is common among the homeschool community where you're gathering together. You can call it family time, you can call it afternoon time, you can call it, whatever it is. So say your last name is Hoffman, the Hoffman homeschool gathering, whatever it is. You can call it hot cocoa chats with the family. I don't know. But it can be your best friend, and it should be. This is when you can cover the topics and you can cover the resources, the curriculum, the programs, whatever it is that can be done as a group. And when you have a bunch of little children, morning time might last 15 minutes. And as they get older, it might last longer. There was a year or two where morning time took up the bulk of our homeschool. it might have taken up about 2 hours, and it was stuff that we could all do together. And now this wasn't when they were younger. This is I really dove into morning time as my kids got older, which sounds opposite of what a lot of people do, but I wasn't familiar with it. So I had children that were late elementary, middle, and high school, and we would do morning time, and it took about 2 hours because we were covering things like the Constitution. We were covering finance. And yes, the late elementary student, my youngest, might not have gotten as much as my oldest, but that's okay. We end up always filling in the cracks. So tip number 4 is that morning time is your best friend. And how about that bonus tip that I want to give you? I want to give you a heads up. Homeschooling multiple ages, it's very common for a lot of us. It's something that a lot of us do. But I'm going to tell you right now, it is, or it can be, at least it was definitely for me. And it's okay if it is, if you recognize this. It can be mentally and emotionally exhausting, especially at the beginning of a homeschool year. I would notice after having a summer off, when we would start back to it, I would be exhausted at night. I'm like, I feel like I was doing less physically, but I was using my mind in such a different way. And so it took me a little while for my mind to then get used to that stamina that was needed. And so when you are homeschooling multiple ages, it can be emotionally and mentally exhausting. It can be physically exhausting as well because you are meeting a lot of needs. And so it's normal to be feeling like this. And so how can we not feel like this? I've talked a lot of times about making sure you get your sleep, making sure you eat well, and making sure you do take some time off from homeschool, that you do enjoy and have joy in your life as well. But the extra bonus we'll say here, the cherry on top is that homeschooling multiple ages can be done. It can be done really well. You have to decide, how is it going to look? What are we going to do? And then you, as the homeschool mom, you have to be disciplined enough to get the things done. Because I'm going to tell you right now, most kids are not going to say, but mom, what about that math lesson? Oh, mom, what about that history paper I'm supposed to write? Now, there might be some anomalies out there that might remind you of such things, and they'll always remind you of the fun stuff. But when it comes to lessons and things that you want to cover, they're probably not going to remind you. So you have to be disciplined enough to get things done. And this is where your homeschool blueprint, the resource that I have that is just for you, whether you are just starting out your homeschool journey or you are years into it, we're going to come alongside you. We're going to talk about all the resources. We're going to talk about styles of homeschooling. We are going to set up a vision and goals for your homeschool so you know where you're starting at and you know where you're going to go. You know what you're aiming for, and then you have the roadmap to get there for this year and for every year. This is like a rinse and repeat. You can repeat this and come up with new goals and a new vision. And I love to be able to come alongside moms and encourage them that what you are doing right now with homeschool is so much bigger than the curriculum. Let's look at it as bigger than that. And all of this that we talked about today is something that we get into more and more in your homeschool blueprint. And the link is in the show notes, or you can go to littlebylittlehomeschool.com/blueprint, and would love to be able to see you over there, walk alongside you, encourage you, and give you that foundation. Again, whether this is year 1 or this is year 5 or year 10, so that you can then see yourself reach those goals and pour into your children and look back someday and say, those were good and fruitful years. I'll see you back here real soon.
Thank you for listening, friend. I'd love to connect with you more. You can find social media links in the show notes and share this episode with a friend who could use a boost to her homeschool. See you back here real soon.